took over 12 months for me to realize that there was nothing we could do about it. It had raised so much money to help fund other projects that we had that we weren't going to pay back all the investors. We're a developer of institutional residential assets. And over a 5-year period, we'd managed to build a £500 million worth of development pipeline. So we'd done incredibly well. Because to me, I mean, don't get me wrong, I lost over £1 million, yeah, when Prosperity ended.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I'm mortified. I mean, mortified for my part in it, for them, you know, mortified for my family, because obviously, you know, we had a £7 million profit in our future as a family. Okay, so, and instead I've said, no, sorry, my life is over.
Welcome to the Property Funding Podcast, the podcast that provides tips and lessons learned for property developers, helping them save time and money. Absolutely delighted today to be joined by Mr. Ed Fowkes. Hello, Ed, how are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm very well, thank you.
Delighted you could join us on our Property Funding Podcast. I look forward to unpacking your journey of life and, of course, your journey in property.
Cool.
Yeah. So we first met at the Christmas Developer Club end of year do or prize giving, I think it was.
Yeah, it was, indeed.
That was what, a year and a half ago, roughly?
Yes, yeah, I think it was probably, yeah.
And strategically, we were just placed at the same table. We had never met before, and we had as I recall, a very interesting discussion that night and debate on various topics.
Yeah, we did. We went quite a long way, actually, for two people who just met each other. I think we got into quite a few things. It was enjoyable.
Yeah. If there had been a recording of that debate and discussion about some of the great issues of life, might get a few views on YouTube or Spotify. But we'll leave those discussions for another day.
Yeah, indeed.
And we'll stick to business and property today. So what had you at that event?
So I'd spoken to them, spoken at their event once before. By then, I think I've done it another time now. And really, so Tex, who is half of the event, used to work for me, and Shiro I used to mentor as part of a group. And I think when we closed the group down, because Gavin and I got just too busy running Prosperity at the time, I think both Tex and Shiro felt like there was quite a void in their lives. You know, when you go, I feel as though mentoring groups, as like mastermind groups that I specifically like, but also going to church is kind of a similar thing. It gives you this kind of, a feeling of community and a feeling and a buzz and inspiration however regularly you go, you know. So for me in church, it was twice a year because it was, you know, Easter and Christmas was when I was forced to turn up. But I still felt as though, because I was getting together with the local community, actually there was a real kind of, you know, there was a buzz around it, and it felt really good afterwards. And it allowed you to, you know, feel really good in life for a little bit afterwards. Yeah. And so when you're doing that kind of thing every month to do a business, it helps you in your business and it gives you the right attitude. And I think that they found that, you know, there was something lacking there. And it took them a good 2 years to kind of go, okay, what are we going to do about it? But actually, they're doing a really good thing. You know? They're providing a lot of value to a lot of people.
Very much so. They'd asked me to come along, having a look at what they were doing with the Developer Club. So I was there as a guest, just observing, and very impressed. Yeah. Impressed with the quality of developers they had in the room. I knew some of them already.
Well, and I've even as a speaker, I've turned up and listened to one of their developer people talking about their business. And actually, you know, I was like, I probably earned about £50,000 over the next few years because I've listened to what you said and I've learned from what you've said. Yeah. So the value of that sort of thing is just incredible if you've got an open mind to it.
No, it is. And they're you know, Tex and Share are really good guys kind of leading that. They've got the right sort of characters and mentality to deal with that type of a business, which is quite unique to be able to corral what tends to be, you know, successful business people. Very headstrong, you know, like get their own way, self-willed, strong-willed. To be able to corral them into a networking type event.
So I find it quite interesting, actually, when because obviously now, you know, we're a startup still, but I'm running Table Network, and I've understood something that one of my oldest friends said to me. So he used to organise for originally it was the British Legion. He used to organise an event called Pedal to Paris, and you'd have 400 leaders in industry effectively turn up, and they were, everyone from people who are captains and generals in the army to people who are running large PLCs or even incorporations, to people who are, kind of working as secretaries and whatever, but you had to be in a position where you could basically raise a minimum of 1,500 quid just so you could attend the event. And you were pedaling to Paris. And he said the moment they turned up in Greenwich, they all turned into school children. And they just had to be led by, a kind of, you could tie them all together on a long rope and just go, right, you're all coming this way. Otherwise, they'd just be messing around. And so actually we all, just in the right place at the right time, the best leaders in the world just become complete incompetents, right?
Absolutely. And it's in some ways, it's an interesting dynamic when you take leaders, particularly military leaders, obviously coming from a military background, men who are used to and experienced at taking men and women into combat, into life and death situations. So very often decisive decision makers, because you have to be. You can't dilly-dally. And then putting them into an environment as a group or doing a charity run or raising funds. It's interesting watching that dynamic, because they're used to giving orders, not taking orders. But there's something nice when you're used to being the decision maker and the giving all the orders. There's something nice not to have to do that, and for someone else to tell you what to do. There's almost like a therapy in that, which is interesting, which I think what you're alluding to, when you get a lot of them together, and it's just like, okay, tell us what to do, when to do it, and we'll just do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that front. So I should have sort of give you the more sort of formal introduction. Strategic business advisor is sort of one of your roles now, as well then as a founder of the Table Network. So they're kind of your two main strands now. So what we do, Ed, is we put our guests on the spot initially, a bit of a surprise, and we do a quick fire round.
Okay.
So you won't have seen these questions. These are just designed to, I suppose, just get you to off the cuff, let the listeners and the watchers get a bit of better understanding about who you are, what you like, you dislike, etc. So quick fire round.
Okay.
1-word answers. Okay.
I'll try.
No descriptions. Just 1-word answers. And if you go off piece, I'm probably going to hammer the table or something.
I was going to say, you're asking a lot from me. You guys go off piece. It's my favourite way of skiing.
Has to work one out. So, favourite food?
Cantonese roast duck.
Favourite film?
Any one of the Star Wars. Just Jedi's.
Favourite country?
I'll say Mexico.
Favourite sport?
Skiing.
Watching or participating?
Definitely skiing.
Definitely actually doing it as opposed to watching. Okay. Now we get the controversial ones. So, Apple or Android?
I have no preference. I currently use Apple.
Oh, that's unusual. Oh, currently use Apple. Does that mean you're aiming, falling on that side? But
I'm just past the age of 50. It's going to be really hard to turn back now.
That's a good one. Good one. I think that's the best answer yet when it comes to that one. Now the big one. This is the controversial one. Marmite, like it or hate it?
I love it.
You're in the category of love it.
Has to have butter and is better on bread, but Marmite all the way. And Bovril's horrible.
No, that's
some
unusual.
people think it's the same thing.
I was going to say, well, they're very similar, no?
No.
Interesting. Okay, so definitely a Marmite. Dream car?
Tesla.
Okay.
A Model S specifically with a performance pack, but
Oh, there we are. There's the goal setting. Be specific in what you want. Okay, I like it.
Although I was very tempted to put I think they were asking for a 50 grand deposit to reserve the Roadster, which hasn't yet come out, the new Roadster, and I was very tempted to put one down on that.
Right.
But as a family man, I've got 2 children and a dog. Roadster doesn't really cut it.
It's not going to cut it. Definitely not. Okay, favorite property type? So, apartments, houses, villas, what any type you like?
I like residential houses. I would almost say hobbit holes, but residential houses generally. Okay. I really like London and Victorian houses, or more Georgian houses, even better. I really like Georgian property.
Okay. And if you could own a property in one location, anywhere in the world, where would it be?
If I'm going to pick one, I will pick Marylebone, but I'd be tempted to pick Shoreditch.
Okay, you stick to Shoreditch in London. Everywhere in the world you can have a property, but London.
London's my home. I still love it, and it's a great city.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
No. Good. Good. I like it.
And it's just multicultural, and it changes all the time. So that's one of the great. I love the fact that we have a lot of immigration in the UK because every born and bred around the corner from here in Hackney, and every 2 years, 5 years, new shops would open up selling things I'd never discovered, never come across before, and I'd get to eat new food, and I just loved it, every single bit of it. Yeah, so I still do.
Cool. Okay. There we are. Let's give our
Sorry, slightly more than one word answer at the end.
well, the last one, at least that wasn't too bad, the last one, which that required a little bit of, I think, explanation, which is good. So, in terms of how we'll develop this, obviously, I want to get a little bit more about your early life. We'll get into that a little bit. We'll talk about your journey into property. The way if I think of Ed Fowkes, and obviously I've met you a couple of times now, we had a coffee in January, I think it was early January, when it was over, which I really enjoyed. And again, we'll mention that later on. But I guess what I see is someone who's got a long, I think over 30 years now, you have in property in a lot of different aspects of property, and obviously experience of business outside property. And if I was to summarize my view of Ed Fowkes, it's been very successful in multiple, property projects, but also some failures.
Yeah,
is that a fair summary?
I think, I'm a serial entrepreneur, let's say. So from that perspective, if you haven't failed sometimes, then you've learnt very little. But I've managed to fail at entire businesses as well. So, some of my lessons have been incredibly big.
Yeah. See, I think that's very candid of you. And I really want to deep dive into that as we go through, because I think sometimes, Ed, there's a lot of podcasts out there, and this social media era we have, people want to just focus on the success stories.
Yeah, on the Lamborghini, as it were, or the
yeah,
moonshot.
I did this, I bought this property, did this and this and this and this and this. People pitch their journeys, people pitch their stories. And for you and I, who are, the wrong side of 50, you're like, hang on.
I'd like to think it's the right side of 50, actually, but
I suppose it depends how you look at it, doesn't it? Which reminds me, I'll tell you a wee story later on about life journeys and all of that, which just sprung into mind. But sticking to this point, we live in a world now where it's so much like massaged history of success in property. And if someone's been in property 15, 20, 30 years and don't have a failure, don't have something that's gone wrong, there's something wrong with the story. Would you agree or disagree with that as an analysis?
No, I'd completely agree, but the same with anything in life, I mean, I've been with, I'm still with the same person who is the mother of both my children, right? Which is quite rare these days, actually, because I think it's probably less than 50%. But that doesn't mean that we haven't had our failures along the way. There are times when we've really had to work at it, and that's why we're still together, is because we bothered to. So I think in anything, even if you've been in one career your whole life, you will have had some failures. It's just whether you recognize them. The people who recognize them and in a way embrace them as much as possible, learn more from them, and end up being better at what they do.
I think that's the key. I think you've hit the nail on the head.
I love learning. So to me, in a way, I kind of enjoy I try. It's impossible to always enjoy your failures because sometimes they're incredibly stressful and etc. But I feel as though I've they're better for me than the successes, because the successes just allow me to go on holiday, right? And the only thing that is good about going on holiday is if you go somewhere you've never been before and you learn about a new country. The rest of it is just sitting in the sun. What's that good for? It's not much, right?
Whereas what you're emphasizing is that when things don't go to plan, or things go wrong maybe, or the wheels come off completely, there's learning, there's growth.
You learn why that went wrong, what not to do next time, what to do next time instead. If you talk to people while it's going on, then you can, learn to steer yourself to a different course while it's in the middle of failure, and actually turn it into a success, which is even better, of course. But I think you need challenges thrown at you all the time. We had a conversation a little bit earlier about personal development. I said I'm not really, I don't do anything to personal development, but I like to grow myself constantly, and I like to learn. It's like, if life's not a learning curve, why are you here?
So just to unpack that slightly, because I kind of would be more on the side of personal development and the importance of reading some good books, listening to some good podcasts.
I'm not saying I don't read or listen to podcasts.
but in terms of your kind of proposition that you don't do personal development the way a lot of people do, but you still want to learn. Is it just your experiences are your learning, or how would you define your learning process?
So when I met Simon Zutshi in 2011, I guess maybe. And I bought my first piece of real estate in 1993. Okay, so it was quite a few years after that I met Simon Zutshi, and he was the person who introduced me to the idea of personal development. I'd never heard of it before. Yeah, so it was because of him that I ended up going to spend 3-4 days with Tony Robbins. Yeah,
So you've been on one of
Unleash the Power event. Yeah.
Okay.
And the UPW is a phenomenal event, but it's not something that I don't want to spend my time kind of going into that sort of thing. It's just not what I need to do. I'm very, very fortunate that almost every morning I get up, all I need is a shower and a coffee, and I feel pretty good.
Okay.
Right, and I feel pretty positive and pretty motivated and And then, so what Tony Robbins did do for me, he kind of taught me this idea of having a little mantra, being able to, if I'm feel as though I'm slipping down into a trough, then I will decide, okay, so I'm going to tell myself that I'm really great and that I've got the power to do whatever I want, blah, blah. And I'll do it for 5 days in the shower, and I won't need it for another 2 years. Yeah, so I don't need a lot of that happening
It's
in
like
my
a booster of it almost.
Yeah, and it's if I, so if I'm going down a really long dark tunnel, which, for example, I like startup phase for companies because it's when you've got the most strategy and the most creativity involved. It really suits my character. But actually, that is the long dark tunnel because you can't see the other end. When you go into it.
And most risk.
And it's got the most risk. Well, I don't. And again, I'm not really bothered by risk.
Yeah,
I would quite happily burn every bridge I've ever crossed to go over the next one. Yeah, I've got
Interesting.
no worries about that whatsoever because I can always build the next one.
I don't think I've ever, in all my years of listening to mentors and podcasts, heard that statement. Say it again. I'd quite happily burn
every single bridge
in the
to walk
past
over the next one.
To walk over the next bridge.
Yeah,
I love that.
I've got no problem with that.
I love that. That is
because I can build it from scratch. Yeah. So one of the things I taught my children when they were growing up was how to use a saw. Yeah. Because I want them to be able to. I can literally build a house myself. You give me long enough, I can build the whole thing from scratch. I can mix cement, pour the concrete, dig the hole, do the roof, do the bricks. I've learned literally I can do everything on a construction site. And that means that if the world falls apart and the Russians take over and we have to rebuild everything from scratch, I can be useful, right? And my dad always said to me, he taught me, the more skills you have, the more likely you'll never be unemployed, right? Is how he put it.
Makes sense.
I've never been employed because I've always run my own stuff, but it is the same thing. And actually, the more skills you have, the more useful you are to other people. So I like that.
I'm not sure I'd like to be your boss, to be fair. You're very entrepreneurial and free-spirited.
I don't think anyone wants to be my boss. I have had a job for 3 months, but
it's not unemployed; it's unemployable.
Yes, exactly.
Is the mantra on that? No, but brilliant. Okay, so let's early life. So you actually brought up or from not too far from here, where you are in Stratford.
Here, yes.
So what was the early life like? Anything memorable in terms of school or what was happening in London at that time?
So I went to a relatively Montessori school before I was then sent off to boarding school. Hated it. Was brought back and sent to a decent school again in London. I was, born effectively with what they call a silver spoon. I was very fortunate that I went to private school.
Okay.
Which, because in Hackney, I would not be the person I am. Although I have met some, amazingly driven and successful people who are property developers who came from around the corner from me, for example. We mentioned earlier going to Romeray Market, and I know someone who lived around the corner from that. His wife was a page 3 model. He was building golf resorts in Spain, at the same age as, when I was buying buy-to-let properties in London, sort of thing.
Right.
So he was much more driven and successful than me in a lot of ways. But what I come from an incredibly creative background. My mum's family is all artists or pianists or that sort of thing. They're all very creative people. And on my dad's side, they were all lawyers. Right. So I also really enjoy the detail and the loopholes and that sort of thing. I'm very kind of, I like picking things apart in a way. I won't say I had necessarily, I didn't get on with my dad because he was very territorial army sort of thing, and I was very peace-loving and wanted to grow dreadlocks, which he wasn't very into. So there was a big conflict kind of there. But equally, for lots of our lives, he was my best friend. So it wasn't like we had a bad relationship. And my mum and my gran and all of her side of the family, my uncle still, who's still alive, her brother, I have great inspiration from all the time. So I'm very grateful about all of it.
Yeah, on that side of it, yeah. I'm kind of hoping that my two sons, one's 25 and one's 20, can listen to that bit. We mentioned the territorial army because I get a lot of around the house when I'm like wanting to get things done and I'm given tasks. It's like, Dad, we are not your soldiers. You're not in the army anymore.
Yeah.
We do not tell us, as an officer tells the soldiers what to do.
Yeah, so I thought my dad was quite Victorian. That's how I would have described him rather than army-barmy. But my 20-year-old works with me. He's my business partner. So I feel as though I've managed to not be that overreaching person. And actually, and both of my kids, my youngest is 17, they're phenomenally well-rounded people. They've got a very good intelligence, able to talk about anything at all, have very good friend groups. As I said before, I blame it completely on my wife because she's just the most amazing mother in the world. But you can make me all emotional now.
Yeah. No, it's and I think it's great. I mean, you mentioned the fact that obviously you're with your wife a length of time, and I know it's digressing, but society today, I feel that a lot of our problems do come from households breaking down and that family unit, family structure. I know we're going down a rabbit hole, but I can tell that means a lot to you, that you've managed to kind of steer your family the length you have.
I didn't want to be part of any family when I was a kid. Yeah, I hated my family when I was a kid. I was very, very rebellious. And I never dreamed I would end up in a happy family environment. So from that perspective, it's kind of by mistake. It is purely my wife who's managed to get that out of me. But I think there's an element, statistically, happy families create children who are more likely to be good people, be successful, follow the line, not get into trouble in terms of going to prison and that sort of thing. Okay, but a lot of it is correlative, I think. Sorry, I keep on getting that word wrong, so that's probably the wrong way of saying it. But it's a correlation sort of thing, statistic rather than necessarily a reason why. Because I know, it's about love. And it's about being an adult to your children, because children need adults, right?
Yes.
They need to be able to be told no occasionally. Although we've tried never to say the word no, we've always wanted them to argue back with us. But if they can win the argument, then they can get their way. But if they can't win the argument,
they have to accept it.
They have to accept it, right?
Yeah,
and it's a little bit like being a democracy, right? You vote, but then if you lose, right? So when I voted to stay in Europe and we lost, I was like, cool, okay, we lost. Fine. I wasn't one of these people who would just go, but I'm going to stamp my foot for the rest of the time. It's like, just get on with it, right?
No, exactly.
So I think, and that's the same with making mistakes in business. You just, you learn from it and you move on.
Yeah, a lot of the skills of family life, because ultimately family and business is about relationships. Ultimately, so if you can get it right.
So I was going to say in the schools, I watched only yesterday a video with the headmistress who was at the school where they managed to win in high court the case against the girl being able to pray in public in the school. And they were, as a school, they were finding it was becoming divisive, and they were, there's a lot of different faiths in the school, and trying to get them all to be friends with each other and live with each other, which is frankly what the world should be like as much as possible, right? Is that everyone who disagrees with each other still gets on and looks after each other.
Correct.
And actually in that school, they have amazing results, they have amazing behavior, and yet a lot of the families, a lot of the kids are from broken homes and from very low income families and that sort of thing that would statistically be in that lower group. But actually how they are dealing with those children, they're making them into really good people. So, or helping them become really good people, because children are only small adults, right? They're adults in the making, and that's what we have to remember.
And those formative years are so important in terms of determining the adults that they become.
Yeah.
You know, you don't get the end result that you might want without the formative years, you know. But I mean, in terms of early life, then, so you've gone through that. Any kind of early influences? So you've mentioned obviously your parents. As you maybe come out of school, get into work, anybody that sort of stand out as someone who either you wanted to be like or who influenced you in the pathway you went?
So I think in terms of life and in terms of, because I come from a very creative background, it was Bowie, because he was I'm very into music. My mum was a concert pianist before she settled down to have children, as it were. She was going to be a concert pianist. And Bowie was always where it was at, as far as I was concerned. You know, and I kind of look back and just look at the amazingness of him. But in business, Branson, and again, he is one of the creative people in business in the UK.
Very much so, yeah.
Right? And I didn't know anyone in the US at the time, you know, when I was a teenager. So Branson was the only figure.
Yeah,
And he did
yeah.
Virgin Records, which,
Yeah,
you know, as far as
yeah.
I was concerned as a muso, was
Yeah,
really,
so
really
that's-
up my street.
Yeah.
Right, so that worked.
Interesting story. Obviously, you were reading one of the books that Branson wrote about his mum. I can't remember what age, was he 5 or 6 or something? And his mum turfed him out of the car, made him find his own way home.
I think he was slightly older than that.
Was he
But
slightly older
yes,
than that? Okay, I can't remember, was it?
I threatened my wife that we should do that to my children, actually.
Yeah, he might have been maybe 9 or 10. I thought I don't
yeah.
think he was any older than 9 or 10.
Yeah, no,
though.
he was pretty young. He was pretty
Yeah,
young.
it was
you know, I mean,
relatively.
it's tantamount to neglect these days.
I was going to say,
right?
now you go to jail.
prison.
You go to jail for that now.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but again, to the concept of what happened in childhood to formulate the character later on, that, you know.
Well, I first went abroad by myself at the age of 15, you know, and I went all the way down to Corsica, you know,
Wow,
at the age of
okay.
15, and with a couple of mates, and we tried not to get arrested on the way, and you know, and then I think we'd slept by the time we ended up in my house. My family had a house in the south of France. We ended up there, and my parents turned up, and we had slept for well over 36 hours on the trot. And when they turned up, because we thought they turned up the day earlier. When they turned up, we were like, surely it's like this date. And they were like, no, it's that day. We're like, oh, okay.
That was a good
We
sleep.
were really drunk.
Yeah, drunk and tired is a good sleep. So in terms then of, I know you have like 30 plus years in property back to about 1993, I think I remember you telling me. And you've been involved in multiple property businesses, you know, rental businesses, development, right through then to Prosperity Capital, which we'll come on to. But give me a quick overview of your journey. Like, what got you into property? What was the initial motivation? And then just like highlight through those 30 years.
So my grandmother came to me one day and she said, I'm going to die one day. Here's £10,000. You may as well have it now because I'm allowed to give it to you, sort of thing. So that you know, the tax, it was a tax issue. I was literally on my way to university at the time, and I sort of looked at the bar, and I looked at the £10,000, and I went, that's not going to last long. So I decided I ought to do something else with it. And it was 1993, so all the property had just literally fallen off a cliff.
Yeah.
You know, there's a guy who had sold a building in Shoreditch, it's Spitalfields technically, for 9 million in '89, and he bought it back for 3 million in '93.
Wow.
So that shows you how much of a tank it was, right?
Yeah.
I found this, found a flat. It was £38,500, and the government was giving, I can't remember even what it was called now, but up to £50,000 worth of mortgage was under a scheme where it was much cheaper and blah, blah, blah. And so I put £8,500 in and spent £1,500 in the bar instead of £10,000. So I was healthier at the end of it. You know.
And richer.
And well, the flat that I bought, I turned my £8,500 into £45,000 while I was at university. You know, which is a pretty good income. For someone who's at university in the early 1990s.
That's a decent start in property, to be fair.
Yeah.
That is a decent start.
Yeah.
That
So
would
I
go
was
down
like,
as a success.
Okay, that's interesting. And I lived for free because obviously the rent that I was getting just paid for everything else. So it was like, that's really, really surreal that you can do that. And that really, so that made me love property. And I over the years, I've done everything in residential, let's say, you know, because I never really looked into commercial, industrial, that sort of thing.
Right.
But almost everything there is to do with residential, I've kind of tried to do. And I like learning stuff. So when Airbnb started, you know, I was like, well, I better make sure I've got some properties so I can rent them out on Airbnb, you know. And I got one I bought and one that I did a rent-to-rent on, well, they now call it rent-to-rent, hadn't been invented then, you know, but I rent and sublet a property. And it was it was a really interesting learning experience and setting up the systems for that, and that sort of thing.
So the success you had on that first property, what were those figures again? You put
So I bought it. I sold it for exactly twice what I bought it for. So I bought it for 38.5, and I accepted 77 because it was double the amount. That was kind of actually emotionally that kind of worked for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I only sold it because one of the local agents who I'd got a bit friendly with. He was probably one of the only agents who would talk to me because at the time I was wearing baggy combats and pink combats at that, and had dreadlocks and that sort of thing, and so I wasn't really the agent's best friend. And he said that he thought the market was about to fall off a cliff again. So I sort of went, oh, better get out quickly.
Sell. Yeah,
and it was probably the worst mistake I've made in my life.
It's probably his mate bought it.
Now it's well over 500,000 for that property.
Wow. But people write books now and do podcasts over that sort of success story.
Yeah. Well, I'm massively dyslexic, so doing a book is not really. It's going to be quite hard for me.
That's not high up the agenda.
I write a podcast. I try and do it once a month, but it's really easy to opt out of it because I'm really dyslexic. It's very hard.
Okay. Another overcome challenge that has to be done. So that's kind of the overview. At what stage did you go like full time in property and was like your sole income? So so that initial one was obviously. I didn't answer your
question at all.
No, sorry. So the initial one was kind of like you got a bit of money given to you.
Yeah. So at uni, I did furniture and interior design, and I ended up doing a lot of art as well. So I had exhibitions in bars and clubs and that sort of thing in central London and some galleries. And then I would also prototype furniture, and I prototype furniture for the likes of Solar Century, for example, which is now quite a successful solar panel company, probably the most successful in the UK, I think now. And I would take on interior design projects that I could also do the building work on, or I'd take on building work projects that I could also do the interior design on. So I kind of did they call it a turnkey package now. And so a lot of the people that were my neighbors effectively, I would say, I'll do your bathroom as long as I can do the design. Right. And obviously they'd treat them as clients and they'd make sure that they'd get the design that they liked and blah, blah, blah. But unless they were quite kind of into modernism, I wasn't really interested in doing it for them anyway, so I turned them away as a client. And while I was doing that, I was also building up a portfolio sort of thing. So I was kind of, always doing stuff in property, even though I wasn't necessarily full-time working just in property. And I think the same as, when we were running Prosperity, we were running a mentoring group. So we were doing something else as well as doing property, right? Yes. And one of my property businesses was actually a social enterprise where we used to house at-risk women. So women who'd just escaped from their abusive husbands or uncles or whatever, beating them up the whole time. And we would house them to give them protection from that environment so they could escape. Also, we would use the profits from the property to help pay for their social care, their mental, care and that sort of thing. And so again, that was, it wasn't the business I made money off because it was a social enterprise and the vast majority of the profits went to provide the social care. But it was something that, I kind of looked at it and I sort of, at the time, I wanted to do more for charity. And I've always, back when I sold art, I'd give 10% of the proceeds to charity. And I've always, ended up with kind of, and Table Network, we want to give 20% of all our profits to the homeless, right? And the idea is to build a portfolio eventually that houses homeless people. And I would love to house 100 homeless people, Because if you can pay for 100 nights a day for people who were previously living under a bridge, that feels really good.
Making a difference. That makes a difference.
As a single person, if I go and help out at a charity, I can only ever do one person's work. Whereas if I run a social enterprise that does that, I can employ 10 people every single day rather than give 1 day a month. And that's far more successful as far as I'm concerned.
That's an interesting insight that yes, we get into property to make money, but there's a whole social aspect
so I'm
of
not
it.
in it for the money. I've never been in it for the money, and I don't really care about money.
Ever? At no point was it like,
I care about my money
because it's going to...
I grew up in Hackney, and my kids grew up in Hackney, and I wanted to send them to private school because there's still not that many good schools in Hackney, right? So when my wife was pregnant, I kind of looked at her and I said, well, I've got to go and get a real job. Right. So I needed to do something which was actually going to make money. And I understand that I have to be in the game to win it. From that perspective. But I'm only here to, one of the reasons why Bowie is, one of the idols of my life is he made a ton of money, but he always spent it on projects that he was creative about. Like he didn't ever do anything to make money. Yeah, and I've never done anything to make money. I don't.
Okay, no, that's interesting.
I understand we're running businesses and that sort of thing, and they die if they don't make money.
Yes,
I
but
get
it's
that,
not the
but it's
overriding
not the reason
driver.
why,
Because for so many people, and even a lot of the podcast guests, it is that drive to be successful. It's the drive to have maybe the car, the house, the lifestyle. That does drive a lot of people.
So I
but
think
what
the
you're saying is
lifestyle,
it wasn't your
the lifestyle
main
is
driver.
a different thing to money. Yeah.
True.
So I live for my lifestyle. I go on holiday to places where I can learn about the local way of living, because that's the lifestyle that I want.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's the lifestyle that tickles my brain, not
Yes.
the lifestyle
Yes.
that gives me a tan.
Yes.
Because I don't really
Yeah,
care about
that-
the tan,
that makes sense.
I'd never walk into Gucci and buy something. I'd happily buy Gucci on eBay. I used to have an Yves Saint Laurent briefcase, because it meant that the CEOs that I had to go and see for business took me seriously.
Yes.
And that's the only reason why I bought it. And
Yes,
I bought it
yes.
for £200 when it would have cost
Yeah.
me $3,500 in the shop. Right?
And,
I've got no
there's-
interest in it.
There's
paying-
lots of examples of that as to how the business world works and perception, even
Yeah.
like driving cars.
Yeah.
You know,
It's why all the front receptions of these large buildings have normally knockoff versions of design classics in it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I went to
it
college
creates-
to learn how to design classics. I understand
Yeah, no,
what it's all about. Right?
I can remember years ago, sort of in sales, and having I can't remember, it might have been a Ford Escort or something. But I remember then it
Great
was
car, by the Escort RS.
Look, well, I had a 1.8 diesel Escort, and I remember paying £120 to get a go faster fin on the back. And my brother still tells people I had an XR3i. I did not have an XR3i. It was a 1.8 diesel and with no turbo. So you had to go out and push if you
those
wanted to
were the
overtake somebody. But those were the days. But I can remember at one stage then in business, I ended up getting a 5 Series BM.
Yes.
And noticeably, seeing the different reaction when he drove into a business to talk to him about business.
Yes.
And you scratch your head and go, it's just perception. But that perception is massive.
I mentioned
Massive.
my old friend Frank, who grew up, around the corner from me, but went to local schools and that sort of thing, and was very much not born with a silver spoon. So I remember having a conversation with him. Our sons, in the end, the reason why I got to know him is because our sons went to the same school in the end, which was the Montessori school that I went to when I was a kid. It was much more academic by that stage. Okay. And I remember asking his son, he asked him something about, we were offering something to eat, and he said, is it organic? Yeah, and that for a kid whose dad grew up in Bow, that's a really, really big leap, right?
Yeah.
So, and he was 7 at the time or something like that.
Right,
It really kind of taught you where his dad had got to.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
but I was having a conversation with his dad, Frank, and he was looking for a new car, and I said, what? And he said, I want something that when I turn up at a 5-star hotel, I'll be the first person to be asked if they want it parked. Yeah, and that was his only criteria for driving a car. And so in the end, he got a zooped up Range Rover or something like that. And it was but he was properly from the East End, so he was really proud that he got £15,000 by asking a question at the dealership.
Yeah.
That was the bit that made sense to him. But equally, he just wanted it parked by the guy. And it's like, okay,
which is where you get this, in some cases, fake it till you make it scenario that at times works in property where. I've heard so many stories about guys who'll, trying to do a big deal, maybe bring in investors into the UK for property, and they go and they hire, a Porsche or Lamborghini to go and pick them up from the airport and just create this illusion of success. But it can influence investors sometimes, which some investors, not all investors, obviously.
I think the one, weirdly, and I'm going to take it back really to the bare bones, I always wanted a business card and to have a company because I felt like it made me look like I belonged.
Yeah.
And that's about as far as it went. Equally, I was with dreadlocks and pink bomber jacket and pink combats with rips in them. So I wasn't necessarily bothered about the full perception. I just wanted... That was, for me, it was like my crutch, was that I actually had a business card to present someone and that it had a business name on it. And that was the crutch that I needed to just make my own self. Because, I'm pretty good with self-belief, but I needed to have something that made people go, okay, you look a bit weird, but at least you'll give me a card that looks like it's official.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No,
and if I'm
exactly,
going to listen when you open your mouth, and I know once I open my mouth, I'm not stupid, right? And and I always like learning, so I know a few things, right? So there are very few things that I can then have a conversation about, which, I'm not going to come over as someone who knows what they're talking about. And if I don't know about it, I'm not going to make it up, right?
Yeah,
Because I'm not going to bullshit people.
Yeah, yeah.
I've learned that very quickly. Or winging and bullshitting are slightly different, because if you can, if you can not say something and let other people teach you the parameters, and therefore you can have the engaging conversation, then that feels like it's worthwhile. But equally, be willing to put your hand up and say, sorry, I have no idea what that means. Because you look really stupid if you fess up 5 minutes in.
Yes, exactly.
Or half an
Yeah.
hour in, or 2 weeks later.
The old best question. The question not asked is
Well, there are no stupid
there's
questions.
no foolish or stupid questions. Yeah, and I came across a little bit in the military, because maybe wasn't my nature to ask questions. It was more let's just watch what's going on here.
Not asking questions in the military. Get your mates killed.
Well,
right?
And even the very base, I can remember like weapon training.
Yeah.
And the guy would maybe break down a weapon and build it again, and then if they asked for volunteers, there's always a couple of guys would volunteer for everything, and of course they would look stupid because they didn't know how to do it. It was brand new.
Yeah.
And I would have just stayed in the background, but they were the ones that got to know the weapon best because they went through the pain of making mistakes. Yeah. Whereas I was like, no, and then all of a sudden you're in that moment where it's your turn. It's like, uh-oh. You have to learn to ask questions.
That's, I think, why I love learning from, making mistakes or crashing and burning or failures or whatever, because it means that you've gone and done it, right? And for all the books you can read, it's never the same as going there.
Yeah,
right? Or these days it's the podcast you watch. You can watch Stephen Bartlett as much as you want to, right? But unless you actually go out and try, you're useless.
Yeah. No. You made a comment to me at one stage about bridges and burning bridges to go for the next bridge. And I can remember when you said that and thinking, I don't think in all my years of mentoring, personal development, listening to the audio tapes, the books, I'd never heard that statement. So just what is that?
So I wouldn't advertise it to other people to do particularly. It just happens it happens to be of my character that I would, so I said I'd happily burn every bridge in my past in order to walk over the next one. Yeah, because I want to constantly move in a direction, and I've got, don't get me wrong, I've got a map in front of me, not a straight line goal, because we keep on meandering in different places, and I tend to go off tangent a lot, right? So so it's good to be able to always be able to see where the goal is, and be able to kind of see where the roads that can eventually get you there. And then also to be able to say, well, that's not the right goal anymore, and you move it, and you know that there's actually a whole load of other roads that go over there as well, and you can kind of see there's a plan. Because people often say, you walk up the ladder and find out that you're nearly at the top, and then it's the wrong one.
No,
and you have to
exactly.
jump off in order to start the new one.
It was the concept. What got me, Ed, was the concept of not going back over, the bridges you've crossed in the past. And probably when you analyze it, a lot of people in life spend their time walking back and forward over the bridges they've already built, as opposed to what's next.
Yeah.
And the old military commander that landed in Britain and burnt the boats, like, what a better way of saying we have to succeed. There ain't no going back, which is the same kind of concept. And I just never heard it put that way before, and I think it makes so much sense.
Well, I often use it to describe that I am very risk on, so I don't mind risk, which is not necessarily, so if you're in real estate, for example, that doesn't sound very good to the bank manager that you're pretty risk on.
True.
But it's one of those things that as a creative person, if you're not taking risks, then you're not releasing your value to the world, right? Because actually creation is all about the risk. And
that's, again, a really, really good point.
You take my icon, Bowie, right? Yeah. When was he not taking a risk, right? And the answer is when he was too drunk and making bad music. Because there was a period in the late 80s when he made really bad music, right? And unfortunately, that's when he was too drunk to take risks. But just before that, every single time, the first time he decided to put on spandex and go on stage with orange hair dressed as Ziggy Stardust, like, that was a risk, right?
A big
and
one.
it turned out to be one of the biggest things in rock history, music history, kind of ever.
Which is interesting because it brings us on.
Same with Branson. Go to business side of things.
Yes, that's right.
I remember, so I heard a story, he was flying over the ocean, and he pointed down, he was almost broke at the time, Yeah. And he could see that his company was about to go bust, and he pointed down an island at his wife and said, "We're going to buy that next."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got to be able to take some risks to be able to say that at that moment.
Well, that probably leads in nicely to where I really want to get into in terms of our discussion. So we had a cup of coffee, I think it was January time last year, and obviously we had met the previous year over the developer club dinner, and I was in the back of 5 or 6 months of sort of tough business journey, and for whatever reason, I hadn't linked you to Prosperity Capital. So it was kind of like, oh yeah, okay. It just obviously I knew the name, but just at the TDC, I hadn't made the link. So obviously you went a little bit into the situation there. So I suppose what I want to unpack a bit with you, and we have had this conversation a few times. So much of the modern world, the social media world, it's paper doesn't refuse ink, cameras don't refuse to record, and it's graphics and it's success stories and it's hype, and people are selling property courses, and it's do this and you'll be successful, 6 steps, blah blah blah. You and I both know that very few people in life have had all success in everything they've done, and it can be tough when it doesn't go well. Could you just speak to a little bit about Prosperity Capital, what the business was, but then maybe just high level kind of what went wrong and sort of the fallout from that?
Yeah, so the business was so what it ended up being, we were effectively we're a developer of institutional residential assets. And normally what they call alternative residential. So that's purpose-built student accommodation, build to rent, micro living, co-living, that sort of thing, and service apartments. So, and we didn't get to all of those, but they were definitely in our pipeline, as it were.
Yeah.
And we started off, there was, where it's almost still tied to my meeting with Simon Zitschi, because I was running a PIN meeting for him at the time, and when I'd launched in Canary Wharf. Which was the kind of one of his 2 biggest PIN meetings in the country, literally only because of location. It wasn't my doing. It was literally I saw that Canary Wharf was the right place to open it, and that's why I launched it. And as a result, everyone turned up. Yeah.
Okay.
It certainly wasn't because I was a wonderful person on stage, because I don't think I ever was particularly. But Gavin was running Blackfriars and Fraser was running Kensington at the time, and we kind of got together to have a discussion about how we could make our PIN meetings work for our businesses more. And we walked out of the meeting with each other, deciding that we were going to start a business together, sort of thing. And we ended up developing in the Midlands and the north, basically in the regions. And our so I ran the London office, and I was the development director at the time. So I was in charge of everything to do with the development. So so nothing to do with the financial side of it whatsoever.
Okay.
But I was to do with getting the team to make that work, finding the pieces of land, getting the planning on them. Okay, and then overseeing the development and getting it to PC, sort of thing. And then we obviously, because it was institutional, normally institutionals would have management companies that would come in and do the lettings and the management of that side of things. And over a 5-year period, we'd managed to build a £500 million worth of development pipeline. So we'd done incredibly well, bearing in mind, before that, I'd never done a development project that was bigger than £1 million. Right, and I was the one who was in London.
So it was a big, it was a big
the
jump.
others had probably done slightly smaller developments than I had. I'd also never done a ground-up development before, right? And we didn't do anything but dig big holes on grounds in the ground before we started in Prosperity. But so it was just all about getting the right team around us, making sure that everyone, who we employed was either incredibly entrepreneurial, like Tex, who worked for us at the time, who's half of the Developers Club, and then or people who were just so who'd built skyscrapers, and therefore for them doing a £20 million purpose-built student accommodation in Derby made of Metsec was like a walk in the park. And we made them interested because we gave them a cut of what we were doing. So that we could make sure that ours was the one that they really turned their attention to and made sure flew really well. And everything we delivered was delivered on time and on budget. We never missed a single planning. Never failed a single planning application that we went in for. And it was just, again, I'm not really a manager. Somehow I managed to embrace that and build the right team and do that, supposedly phenomenally well. However, and this is something that that the reason why it failed, okay, the big failure happened.
Yeah, so you got everything was going really well
Everything-
there. All the jigsaw puzzle seems in the place, looking like we're going on trajectory upwards.
And it looked like a rocket ship. It really did look like a rocket ship.
And then the wheels come off. So
despite the fact that I never want to buy a Lambo in my life, okay, it really did look like a rocket ship. The side of the business which was dealing with investors, okay, smaller investors, so what I think of as mum and dad investors, they were all high net worth individuals and sophisticated and blah blah blah, and we were joined with a fully FCA regulated company in order to make sure that we followed all the rules correctly, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Although in fact they weren't, okay, and that was, but like a lot of developers do, so a lot of developers, when they've got one project which is doing really well and it's easy to raise for, they end up putting money from that one into another one, right? And there's a lot of cross-pollination. And it's quite hard to run a development company without doing that, to be fair.
Correct.
And normally it works out fine, right? Okay. Well, so we were in a situation whereby it was our second development that we'd done in Derby. And we were just agreed to sell it for, I don't know, 23, 24 million, whatever it was. I discovered that it had raised so much money to help fund other projects that we had, that we were kind of earlier days on, that we weren't going to pay back all the investors on the day we sold the project. Yeah. So not only had it raised the profit, it had raised then well beyond the profit as well. Yeah. Okay. So it wasn't that the project didn't make money. The project made quite a decent amount of money, but it was
not enough to.
Well, but the money had been spent on projects that still had 3 years to run.
Yeah.
Right? So there was no way.
So
of
you're
doing
caught.
that.
You're caught.
And that was just the beginning of. It was that combined with there were a few things happening in terms of macro things that were happening. So Brexit, we still hadn't yet exited Europe. And that we were still in that very uncertain stage where
limbo land.
a lot of our potential customers were going, well, we're just not quite sure we want to spend that money right now because we're trying to put it off. As long as I don't lose my job, it's better I haven't spent it. Right? Because when you're a fund manager, you're obliged to spend. But equally, if you can get away without spending it when the world looks a bit shaky, you're probably more likely to keep your job when everything goes sour.
Whenever it goes all south. Oh, 100%.
100%. So there was that. And then there was also the fact later on, when we were I'd managed to turn it around and we found a way through. So I did actually, and I spent a lot of time working with our, the person who'd made the blunder resigned and left pretty much, but they left about 3 months later, actually. They fully walked away.
Right.
But during that kind of 3 month period, I worked out with one of our non-execs who was a very experienced FCO, how to, exactly what had happened, exactly where every single penny had gone, made sure there'd been no one stealing money from anyone that didn't belong to them and blah, blah, blah. So all those sorts of things. And then we worked out how we could find a way through. Yeah. And we sort of, and there was going to be a certain amount of, and I can't remember what it's called anymore. I was going to use the word moratorium, which is definitely the wrong word. A certain amount of kind of negotiating with the investors to make sure they could hold off and not have a run on the bank, because a run on the bank would have made all the dominoes fall over flat immediately. Right? And when you're in that situation, it's very hard to, and you've got to be very sensitive with, and you can't, unfortunately, legally, you're not allowed to look after your friends any differently than you look after your enemies, right? Every investor is the same.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't matter whether they're about to have to take their kids out of school. They're treated exactly the same as the guy who's a shark.
Treating customers fairly would be the sort of the FCA mantra around that.
And so it's it's an incredibly sensitive situation when you're the one who's basically had to take over the role. Having never spoken to any investors in my life, I had to take over the role of talking to all investors, 120 of which, and 110 of which I'd never met before, and 10 of which I brought in because they were my friends, right? Yeah. And the other 110 and they met, and they were really cross with me because all I was doing was telling them bad news.
I can imagine that. So in terms of, I know from a time point of view, I mean, maybe another podcast will unpack everything, but in terms of like the end, then we get to the end of that situation. Like, what
So
was the damage?
COVID nailed the coffin firmly shut.
Right,
Yeah,
okay,
is what I'd
okay.
say, because we were on a situation where various things had to go right
Yeah,
for us to
yeah.
actually be able to get out of
Yeah.
this correctly.
So
and
you
we
had a
could have
plan,
ridden
but it needed factors
But then when
outside your
COVID
control to
happened,
deliver.
and I remember, I was at the time on a ski lift with my 2 boys, and someone got on the ski lift with us. Okay, it was a bubble car in Chamonix, and they coughed. And all 3 of us just put our snoods up automatically. And I just looked at my 2 boys and went, fuck. Because that was, that was a very big, like, this is going all over the world.
Yeah.
Right? And it was February. So it hadn't yet been officially, it had come to the UK at that stage, right?
Yeah.
It was mid-February. And I just saw this
was
guy cough,
just
and all of us just went, we're putting our snoods up. And I sort of went, oh my God. That's like, the world is not going to be the same from here on in, because this is about to be a pandemic.
Absolutely. So that ended up being then kind of, as you say, the final nails in the coffin.
It took over 12 months for me to realize that there was nothing we could do about it, because I'm so emotionally, wanting to look after everyone.
Yeah.
Because to me, I mean, don't get me wrong, I lost over £1 million. Yeah, when prosperity.
So yeah, I was gonna sort of come to that.
It was very painful for me.
I
was one of the
genuinely
larger
do not know the
investors.
figures. I don't know them, so this isn't a gotcha question anyway.
Yeah.
What was kind of the damage? So you lost. You
I lost
reckoned
well over
a
£1 million.
million?
I was one of the largest investors in prosperity. There were in total over 100 people. In terms of mum and dad's money, it was probably in excess of 20 million.
So headline figures, 20 million that was
and
invested.
I don't know whether that was including interest or interest.
Yeah,
but
okay,
it was
yeah,
a
but
lot
as a
lot
ballpark,
of parent school fees is effectively what I
So-
think of it as someone who has had real trouble paying their kids' school fees for the last 4 years.
And obviously you say it was done with the correct sort of FCA regulations, transfer promotion, all that.
But obviously there were corners cut, because you can't cross-pollinate money if you're doing it the way the FCA needs you to do it.
Correct, yeah.
So there
but
were
for the
corners
investors who put the money in, they were obviously understood the risk. What was it, loans or was it equity?
So I think that they should have understood the risks, and certainly, I mean, I was asked to, if ever I was asked to talk to an investor, it was almost always about the project, the development that they were interested in investing in. So I was only ever talking about what we were doing in the development. But there was a lot of they had to kind of answer various questions, and there was a lot of self-certification, because that's what the FCA needs people to do.
Correct.
Right. And as a result, it's very easy to, like you do when you go and sign up to Apple, you tick the box at the bottom of the thing that you don't even have to bother to read, right? Okay. Now, when I was on the FCA register, while I was at Prosperity.
So you were an approved person?
So I was an approved person in as far as the FCA was concerned. I didn't have to read the tome that they gave me to read. Yeah, it was quite a lot of work for me, but I'm kind of quite diligent as a person, so I read it, so I understood what I was getting myself in for. But if I didn't want to, I didn't have to take a test at the end of it. They just said, read this, and that's fine. We'll put you on our register.
Yeah.
And it's like, really?
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So you end up in a situation then with, you've got to the end of the road, as you say, the nails in the coffin on the lid are firmly down. You have personally lost $1 million. Investors have, looks like they've lost 20 million. How do you feel?
Oh, I mean, I'm mortified. I mean, mortified for my part in it, for them, mortified for my family, because obviously, we had a £7 million profit in our future as a family. Okay. So, and instead I've said, no, sorry, like my life is over, kind of pretty much. And I'm depressed, properly depressed for a year. Yeah, and then when I say that, so I don't suffer from depression, but I didn't smile when my kids tickled each other on the sofa in the same room as me. Yeah, so I knew I was depressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so partly when a business that you've been working on for 7 years goes south, like it's really, really depressing. Yeah, it's really upsetting, and it's very hard not to be emotional about it. When when it was on your watch that people had to take their kids out of school, or people had to sell their houses, or people got their parents to invest in one of your projects and they had to downsize as a result at retirement age. I mean, the stories are just heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I took that immensely personally because I don't, I'm not in it for the money. I'm doing it for the creation of value, because like our first ever development, we created, what was it? 520 bedrooms. I was going to say 350. It was 520 bedrooms. We leased it to the University of Derby, okay, on a strip lease, okay. So Aviva bought it. Yeah, they got a very stable return for their pension fund that was within what they wanted. Okay, so we did well for a lot of people's pensions. The University of Derby made money off this building and are still making money off this building and make money off it for 30 years. And at the end, they own it, having made money off it for 30 years. Okay, that's a really good thing for society.
A good outcome. A good outcome.
Okay, so I'm very proud of what that does for people.
That part of it. Yeah.
And that's why I do it, is because we can make the world a better place. That's why I've always been an entrepreneur, is because I like to make the world a better place, not because I want to cause people to lose money or blah blah blah. And I know how much it fucking destroyed people's lives, because I was one of them.
But you also know that being in that entrepreneur space, being the risk taker that we've talked about, it can go wrong. The wheels can come off, and in prosperity capitals, you could say the wheels come off spectacularly in that situation.
So I don't mind, I cared about my £1 million because of my children and my wife. Not because of me.
No, I understand.
I am big enough and grown up enough and blah, blah, blah. And also, powerful enough in my spirit and intelligent enough that I can go and do it again if I want to. I never do that again. But I can go and, I have 3 times a week, I have an idea that I can make £1 million off go through my head. I'm just really bored of most of them by the time they've exited the other side 2 minutes later. So for me, it's just about finding the one that I can actually knuckle down on for 2 years.
And stick that.
Because it takes a while. Right?
So we had a coffee in January.
And I felt really sorry for you, because you were. I'd just come out of it. I was just on that bouncing board back up. And you were absolutely just in that almost like getting to the bottom of your trough.
I was going to say that. So when we set the meeting up, it was a case of let's catch up. We had met the year previous. I wasn't fully aware of all the background, and then we sat having a cup of coffee, and you started to share some of your story, and I'm just thinking, going, wow, I am right now, like, in that situation where I had a successful business, was an FCA approved person, successful in the sense that we had a model that was definitely working. We generated over 200,000 revenue over a 3-year period. We over 5 million equity raised. We're 24 projects funded. So we had traction. And I watched over an 8-9 month period that business literally collapsed to a point of gone. We had probably about 460,000 of investor money. And I can just remember the frustration of realizing that actually I have been at the helm of a company that has lost people's money. That's not a comfortable place to be.
No.
But then, in my case, a couple of 100,000. In your case, so whereas me paddling in the shadows, you've walked through the deep river.
So it's funny. When the reason why I said Mexico is one of my favorite countries in the world. I listed it as my favorite. So we lived there as a family for 2 years. And actually we lived there because I really needed a holiday. And so we went for a year's sabbatical and ended up staying 2 years. But I was basically on holiday. I learned to retire, let's say, is because I was in a financially free situation. I kind of went, let's go and find out what that's like. And then I got bored really quickly. I went, I never want to do this again. But I said to my wife when we were coming back, I said, okay, just to let you know, the day I go and get the second mortgage, doesn't matter whether it's 2 or 22 or 222, because as soon as one falls down, the chances are that it leads to, and actually weirdly, when you get to over 10, if one falls down, it's probably, because it's only 20%, it's the same as, you can't live with 3 customers.
Yes,
because one of them can fold your business.
You need scale.
Yeah. And it's the same thing, and it's specifically in people like rent to rent. Rent to rent doesn't work unless you've got more than 10 properties because
Yeah.
the margins
Yeah.
are just too tight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the
No,
one
yeah.
property that
Yeah.
doesn't work really,
Yeah.
really tanks you. And it's the same with a buy-to-let, actually, because the margin is quite small. And, I used to do buy-to-lets on very high yields. So we used to get 13% gross yield in Zone 2 in Hackney. And that meant that, we were getting 30% return on our money. And we were getting incredibly high rents because we were working with LHA strategies and things. And actually, you could get away with 3 properties. And if one of them tanked, the other 2 could wash the third one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you need a certain scale to make it work, right? And generally they say don't put your eggs in one basket, but actually you need a lot of baskets.
Yeah.
And that's why, I don't know, lots of people these days, all the gurus talk on YouTube about multiple streams of income, whatever.
Yes,
like when shit
which
goes
makes
wrong, you really want
makes a lot of
something
sense. Yeah. No,
keep the eggs.
I think there's some real important. That's part of one of the lessons that maybe come out of the experiences. I'm a firm believer that adversity in life, in any situation, be it sport, the battlefield, business, to an extent family, but sticking to those first 3, it's adversity where you see the real character of the person, i.e., the adversity can be the same, the situation can be the same, how people respond to it, I think indicates character. So there you are, you're feeling depressed, you're talking about, and I could tell you were getting emotional, your kids are sort of tickling each other and there's not even a smile. Was it frustration or anger and bitterness? Was there any sort of, were you conscious?
I don't really suffer
you were
anger.
conscious that you could go down the wrong path in that scenario?
No, I don't really suffer anger. I think it was. So it's funny. You said a few things which meant things to me along that kind of journey. And because of the way I am, I just dropped them all out of my head immediately, as you mentioned the next one. But I think so just my way out of it for myself was I had to remind myself of what I found valuable in life. Yeah, and it took me a long time before I could actually go, because so during the year afterwards, I spent a lot of time walking my dog. Okay, and it wasn't because walking my dog was a pleasure. Walking my dog was distinctly not pleasurable for me. Yeah, and looking at the leaves in the so I'm a very creative and visual person.
Yeah.
So leaves and clouds and that sort of thing like really bring me a lot of joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, none of it. Right, I got nothing from it. So I had to remind myself of what is it about looking at leaves in trees that does give me joy? Why is skiing my favorite sport? Yeah. And why do I, like the friends that I've got? And and I had to kind of, make a list of the most valuable things that I used to really enjoy when I used to enjoy stuff.
That's conscious actions.
Yeah.
To almost like reset your mind. Is that a fair way of putting it? Or reset what you're focusing on?
It was just to remind myself of kind of, so that I could go, okay, maybe I should look for that then.
Yeah.
And it was just really just by telling myself that used to be the thing, just allowed it to start being the thing again. Yeah. And I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like I wasn't, I did a lot of learning during that period. So I was basically studying, and now one of the best universities in the world is YouTube, thank goodness, because I could study from home during lockdown.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about blockchain, which a lot of people call cryptocurrency, but it wasn't just about cryptocurrency, it's what it could do. Yeah. And I had an amazing conversation this morning. One of the things I love about being a member of Table Network, as well as being the founder of Table Network, is that I get to meet incredible people doing incredible things because they're all founders and people growing businesses, okay? And the conversation I had this morning with someone who's putting the ownership of real estate on the blockchain in conjunction with both the land registry and the FCA. So literally you're going to be able to buy almost like shares in actual real estate in the UK, which is just an amazing thing to be able to do. It's like fractionalizing the ownership of it.
Yeah.
And so you can live in California, and actually if you feel like you are wanting to, because I think one of the, and I'm going to maybe sound a bit conspiratorial now, I do like a conspiracy theory, but a lot of the very intelligent people and very successful people in the world are now realistically talking about this. So the IMF a few years back said people will own nothing and be happy. right? That was kind of one of the big statements they made.
Yeah.
And actually, ownership, having your savings and having your money in assets is far more important than having it in what they call fiat currency, because fiat is basically debased constantly, right?
Yeah, correct, yeah.
Okay, which is why we have to pay huge interest rates
Yeah,
if we want to borrow
absolutely.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
So whereas actually the reason why real estate goes up in value is because the money it goes up in value of is just being, depressed the whole time and debased the whole time. So the idea is that you can, you have your bank account, but actually where you've got a bit of money in a property in Kensington, a bit of money in a property in California, and a bit of money in something else somewhere else, and that way the value of that property is what keeps your money worth money, sort of thing. The same as it would be, whether it's Tesla stock, Palantir stock, Microsoft stock, whatever, or Wells Fargo if you're an old school person, or whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana, it's like, or I don't know, Dogecoin if you want to go for one of the memes. But that idea of being able to kind of link in, I really like that linking modern tech with old style stuff, because actually the world changes, and I love evolution.
There's definitely
I've gone off tangent again. You have to
but
bring me
there's
back.
definitely some real changes in the world economy that's come out of tech being merged with older ways of doing things. I think that's absolutely right. You know, so okay, so that was really interesting, and thank you for being so honest regarding that. And it was.
Well, don't get me wrong. Like there are people who are still incredibly angry with me, and fair play to them. Yeah, it was on my watch. Yeah, I didn't do it, but it was on my watch, and I should have been able to see it sooner. Yeah, a lot of the information was obfuscated when it was presented to me on a monthly basis. So that's why it took me 3 months with an FCO of great experience to be able to unpick what happened. I have no reason to say that people shouldn't be really angry. And I'm finding it hard to swear before the word angry, because they really deserve to be very angry.
And that I think is very.
What I want them, I hope for them that they can move on with their lives. Not to stop being angry with me, but just to be able to move forwards, because life is for living.
Yeah, and life does have to go on, and that's where and the conversation with you, helped me, if I may say so. Just talking to someone who'd actually been through a much deeper river than I went through, and actually recognizing that there'll be a tomorrow. You'll move on with life. There'll be opportunities, and things happen for a reason, and it was really an interesting conversation that night. Because it's frustrating, and you feel responsible.
I wish that things that happen for a reason didn't have to happen in the first place, though. Because sometimes, and that's
but then this is where the learning comes in, which we talked about, and the scars.
Other people
and
losing
all of that.
20 million quid isn't worth me learning.
True.
Like some lessons are not.
But
I've yet to look back on it and go, it was worth going through. I'm trying to take as much learning as I can with me.
But it's not
equally,
about saying.
That doesn't mean that it was worthwhile.
Yeah, that's very well put, actually. I see what you mean by that.
And
there shouldn't be a scenario where someone loses that then becomes I'm glad that happened.
Yeah, life should never be
happen.
a no-win game, I think. And I don't like no-win games.
No, absolutely fascinating. So pivoting now as we come towards the end of this, Ed, in terms of funding. So the property funding podcast, you obviously had funding scenario that went horribly wrong with some decisions within the business. Just speak to funding in general in the property world. If someone was just starting out as a developer, any input, advice, lessons that you've learned in terms of how to fund projects, what to look for, funding partners, pitfalls, anything you could just speak to that?
This is the kind of for people early days. You have to realise that money is much slower than property. The opportunities, So getting to know your money, getting to know the people who have money who are going to invest in your project, you've got to know them really well. And even when you do know them really well, they can be quite fickle, right? Or they can appear quite fickle. Learning to speak their language is really, really important. And that's, so we were talking about Sam earlier, Sam Lowney, and having someone like him who can speak their language to translate what you say is really, really important. Because if you say, I'm happy to burn every bridge I've ever walked across to go and cross the next one, every bank in the room will then leave the room. Right?
That's a fair
really,
one.
really sensibly. Because they don't like risk. The banks, everyone who's got money, all the number one rule is don't lose it, right?
Yep.
So first of all, am I guaranteed to get every single penny I'm putting in back, right? And if I can do that, then I'll think about it. If I can't guarantee to do that, then forget it. It's not worth the conversation, right? And that's the number one thing that the bankers think, and that's never what the developer thinks. Because they think, can I build a skyscraper? Or,
yes.
Gavin used to say, can I put a shadow on the Thames?
Almost blinkered and oblivious to the risk that's there.
Yeah.
They only see the success.
So
in terms of, you obviously still move in the property world. You have different, I know with part of your table network, you have some developers or
I've got
members.
fingers in a few pies as well, but mostly, like I really like the strategy and the creativity. And I think one of the things I've tried to bring as a positive from what happened during that period is that it allows me to be more beneficial when I'm advising other people.
Yeah,
because there's an awful lot I know that other people have never been through, and actually that provides value to them.
Yes,
as well as the fact that I love strategy and I like the jigsaw puzzle and I like
all coming together.
The game of business is the same as the game of life, right? We're just players on a chessboard, and actually understanding the rules of the game, following them and piecing them together is just that's the bit I really really love.
Yeah. Do you ever come across Simon Sinek?
Yes.
Some of his stuff. So he's got a very interesting concept about the finite and the infinite game. In business, which is quite an interesting way of looking at things, and how it is so much diverse from what most people see as how business works, which it was fascinating. In terms of funding, where do you think, if we were to take 100 SME developers out in the market there now with say less than 5 years experience, how many of them make mistakes in their funding, either their capital stack or not understanding the cost of money or not realizing that there's alternative funding out there? How many?
99.8%.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of you don't know what you don't know, and while you're young, you've no idea. And even when no matter how much you learn, you don't learn everything before you die, right? So there's always going to be things that you could have done better. And then there are so one of the things when I met Simon Zichy was in 2011, and I bought my first property in '93. I'd grown a portfolio, I'd sold a portfolio, I'd done lots of refurb flips and developments and that sort of thing. During the time up to before I met Simon, I'd never heard of networking until I met Simon. Right, I'd never been to a networking event in my life, and it completely transformed the way I did business because I just didn't know what it was for. And the amount of, and he taught me, you don't know what you don't know. So while I used to go and learn when I ran my construction firm, I used to learn every single job on the construction firm so that I could, I look at it now and I kind of go, well, I looked at it for many years and thought, if the world falls apart, at least I can rebuild it and be useful. But actually, it meant that I could, if the tiler tried to pull the wool over my eyes, I could say, no, you do it like this, and I could show them what they were doing wrong, right? Or why it was crap, or blah, blah, blah. Or I could just sack them and do it myself, which is the other way of doing it, okay. But actually, one of the things I realized through meeting Simon was that there was a whole load of stuff that they could, other people could bring me that I didn't know. So, to answer you, everyone is making some mistakes, and the world of finance is morphing and changing all the time. So there's always new stuff to learn.
That's a good point.
No matter how much.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And you look at the likes of St George's part of the Barclay Group, but you look at the likes of Barclay or Bovis or any of the kind of the really big house builders, they call them. They all started with cash. Yeah, and very few of them have actually used debt at a level where it was going to be dangerous if stuff started to slow down or whatever. Yeah. So for me, like I learnt, debt is dangerous because when it slows down or when something goes wrong, it gets really expensive, and it gets more expensive the worse things get. Whereas JVs, yes, you're giving more away, but it's a lot less risky. Right, so I really like working alongside people and with people because we're both in the boat together, rather than, the bank is holding the cork.
Yes.
And if they decide to leave,
and are minded to pull the cork.
Yeah, and are reminded to
at the first opportunity they get.
Yeah. Well, maybe not. Because actually, I've had. I think
some.
I think I've had quite good relationships with banks, but there comes a point where they are obliged to pull the cork. It's either they lose their job, so they can't feed their children, or they pull the cork on you and you can't feed yours. I mean, if I'm in their situation, I know which one I have to do, right?
I was with a guy this morning, obviously I won't mention his name, who had, if memory gets me right, had 5 development projects on the go, all with the same lender. And he was 2 days late on one of his payments. And that started a chain of events that he lost all 5. The lender went, not happy you missed default.
I almost can't believe he's telling you the full story.
Default.
That's so extreme.
That started the chain. Obviously, there were, but
to be fair,
that was the. You talk about the pull the cork out of the boat moment.
But I've been into talk to mortgage like large brokers, in fact, the providers of the money themselves, and talking to them, and they don't even have to show me the contract, and I know that they're working on loan to own contracts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that does exist. Right?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you work with the more.
I
wouldn't say
just explain
back.
what you mean by that for the
well,
listeners.
so their contracts are worded in a way that they can absolutely. They don't pull the cork; they remove you from the boat, and they take ownership of the boat really quickly.
That's a really good way of putting it.
In that analogy, and I do like an analogy. That's
no, that makes a lot of sense, and then people can get that.
So and they, certain loan to own contract is basically we have the power to take over really quickly, and you look then at their track record and you go, yeah, they've done that on several occasions, and I don't want to be that person, because they're always paid out first, and typically when it becomes a loan to own situation, they then either have a third-party company or they start a company to do lots of advice and management. They pay that company extortionate fees, which is every single bit of everything up to the point where they can close the company at the end with no debt. But trust me, you're not going to be paid. Right? It doesn't matter how much money you had in there because you're not the bit that counts. Right?
Correct. Yeah. And that's why it is so important. It's one of the reasons I decided to pivot to prop funders. Because I could see so many developers making bad choices. Yeah,
well, and I think educating yourself in funding is so worthwhile. In the same way as having a broker. So I used to have an argument. I used to have lots of arguments with Gavin actually, and it's one of the reasons why we were so good together as business partners is because we used to be very at ease with disagreeing with each other and coming to the right decision. Yeah. So he used to really like debt. I used to really like JVs. Right? Okay. And that was one of those sort of things. Yeah. He wanted to squeeze the interest rate on the debt as much as possible so that we kept as much as possible. And it's like, well, I'm not being in it for the money. I'm in it for the enjoyment. So I just want to work with other people.
Yeah, you want to just make sure.
And that kind of loan to own is just, I mean, it's cruel. And when I've seen it go badly, they always just rack up the fees. Yeah. So that because they get paid out first.
Scary. And listen, that's all they care about. Always say, if property development was easy, everyone would do it. It's not for the faint-hearted.
Life is
not for the faint-hearted,
right? I mean, life is actually not easy. That's one of the reasons why, so you and I have a difference in opinion of what religion does for us. But religion's like the good bit of religion, a little bit like the small c of conservative, is really, really good and valuable, right? Because it creates a community and it gives you a sense of, it makes life easier in a lot of ways because it takes all the crap bits and goes, doesn't matter. Yeah, and actually, if you're an atheist, it's quite hard to realize that it doesn't matter. That's one of the problems that atheism gives you is that everything matters. But actually, no, it doesn't fucking matter because it's really about doing as much as possible you can in the right direction so that you can make the world a better place. And that's
as we said that night on our dinner at the TDC, I just do not have enough faith to be an atheist. But that's another conversation another day.
A great quote.
So wrapping this up then, last question or last sort of opportunity for you to kind of leave your future. So I'll rephrase that. Last question by way of what's the future hold for Ed? So you've had your ups and downs, your journeys. You've burnt lots of bridges. You're still walking over bridges. go forward 5 years. You've got your table network.
So
You're
one
doing some
day,
consultancy. Where do you want to be in 5 years?
well, one day you will find me building another Hobbit hole. Yeah, that will happen. It'll probably be
Okay.
something to do with an Earth ship. If you go and look up Earth ships, they're really hippie-ish buildings
Okay.
that get as much from the land as possible, and they're as harmonious with the land as possible. So my favorite architect was Frank Lloyd Wright. And Frank Lloyd Wright was a modernist, but as long as everything came within a certain amount of mile radius of the land that he was building in. And he used to preserve trees that grew through the middle of his buildings, or use a rock as the hearth of the fireplace that was in situ when they started off, and that sort of thing. He was very in tune with nature, even though he produced very modernistic buildings, at least earlier in life. And he was part of the first ever skyscrapers, because he was he worked for one of the first skyscraper companies in Chicago as an apprentice, back as they kind of came up in the late 1800s. So I will do that one day. But for the moment, Table Network is it's a supportive community for entrepreneurs and business owners. You know, so people like me, I've spent my time stepping in puddles of water and getting my feet wet, right? And if I can help people like my son, who's now my business partner in Table Network, to avoid the puddles, I've done something really worthwhile.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
So that's and it's about everyone getting together and supporting each other. And we have specific tables, you know, which are tables of up to 12 people, where you all become each other's non-execs on a regular basis, and you sit in person around a table, because trust is really important when you're trying to really support each other and go through each other's challenges and things. But equally, we hold monthly events which are, you know, free for the first time and only £10 a time to turn up to, where you can return the water and say, do I like that kind of thing or not? And we are going to be creating courses which are, you know, 2 of them will be about how to deal with your finances. We'll have a beginner's course and a more advanced course. And how 2 of them will be into sales and marketing, or just 2 in marketing and 2 in sales. And so for, you know, a very small amount of money, you can really increase your value and the value of your business. Yeah. But not in a personal development quite so much, but in I want to learn more and be a better leader. To my people, and also understand more what they do and what they need and what the business needs. Because a business is a person in itself, right? Legally, it's its own little animal kind of thing, and you have to feed it and look after it.
Yeah,
right?
that's a good.
And make sure it grows.
Yeah.
And so teaching or enabling people to become better at that. And realistically, is so that people of my son's age, who I see as myself, don't have so much pain all the way through, right? Learning from other people is so much cheaper.
Yeah, well, that's a noble cause, worthwhile.
Well, I hope so. On the side, we're putting 20% of our money towards, you know, housing homeless people, because that's actually the bit that. Well, I tried to put a business together to do that during lockdown. Actually, that's what I tried to do. But the way that working in a similar way, the way that I ran the social enterprise previously, but the way the government has strangled money and that sort of thing over time, I would have had to move to Manchester to do it. And run HMOs, which is not, you can't put people from living under a bridge to living in a ghetto or a you know, kind of in squalor. You can't do that. You've got to actually enable them to transform their lives back. And I've got a really big problem with universal credit and that sort of thing, because it strangles people into a position, and it's really hard for them to get out of it. You know, and the best thing they do is give truant kids holidays for free, and it's like you're just encouraging people to tell their kids to be truant. Right. That's not the way to make a better world.
No, listen, you've opened a lot of Pandora boxes.
Yeah, no, I mean there's about 17 different conversations going through my head.
Which is great. I think there's going to have to be a podcast Mark 2 where we can deep dive into these. But listen, I really enjoyed having you on. Fascinated by your story. Really appreciate that you've been so honest. And it was clear. You know, there was emotion and some of the answers as you relived your journey. And I think that's so important, Ed, for people out there, that property is not all just unmitigated success. Property is not all everything you touch turns to gold. There will be problems. There will be challenges. And you have to be able to be prepared for that.
It's not about the amount of success. Success is actually about how you get up again after failure.
Yeah, that's a brilliant place to end the podcast, because that's exactly it. And if those listening, property developers, there would be property developers, you know, that's a fantastic lesson to learn, that there will be challenges. It's how you get up, it's how you get over them, and how you move on. And I'll finish with